for the Newman Lake Flood Control Zone District. Thought I'd start out at first. We have a couple of new faces since last year, though some of you may have had a chance to meet, but I thought we'd just kind of go around and introduce everybody as well. First off, maybe I'll introduce Jacob Lairway, and then I'll let him introduce himself too. He's a new engineer, replaced Malcolm, for those of you that remember Malcolm Hamilton. So Jacob, go ahead, put you on the spot.
Yeah, I'm Jacob Lairway. I just graduated with my degree in civil engineering at University of Idaho, and yeah, I'm a environmental programs and floodplain engineer with Spokane County now. So it's great to be here.
We're happy to have him on board. So Derek, you want to?
Yeah, hello. My name is Derek Vallar. I'm a water resources technician. I replaced Karen Kruger back in April. So I've been working out with Newman Lake and assisting in road maintenance projects for public works. Yeah, been great working with Newman Lake community so far.
Thanks. Dawson, you want to?
Yeah, I'm Dawson Matthews, for anybody who doesn't know. I've been here for about 2.5 years now. And I work with as one of the other engineers out at Newman Lake, and then also for the county doing other road maintenance stuff and some capital projects. And yeah, so it's good stuff.
And then I'm Marianne Berentine, and I've been around a while, but kind of back in the midst of Newman Lake again now, with Colleen, who, in case you hadn't heard, has accepted another position. So we are in the interim. I'm trying to picking up some of the slack, and then also Dawson and Jacob and Derek are pitching in as well. So yeah, Chad, did you want to do a quick introduction too? And I don't know, Ron's hiding behind the EWU flag there, but we'll have to get him out.
I'm Chad Coles. I'm the Spokane County engineer and also the administrator of the Newman Lake Flood Control Zone District. I don't even want to talk about how long I've been around, so we'll pass it off to Ron now.
Yeah, Ron Valencia, work with Commissioner Kearns' office, District 1.
Great. And we've got a little bit of a special guest. I'll go ahead, although she's not talking for a little later, but I'll let Sue introduce herself too while we're in the round of introductions. So.
Thanks, Marianne. So Sue Nisgoda, faculty in civil engineering at Gonzaga University, and working with the Land Council in Spokane County on the BDA project in Thompson Creek. And so I'm here, I guess, to talk about that a little bit later, but also wanted to hear about everything else going on out there. So have joined now. And I also might have 2 of my 3 senior students that are working on this project with me. They, I think, will join as well to sort of listen in and get some background and history on what's happening out at Newman Lake, and that which will help them in their senior design process. So,
great, thanks. We're excited to be part of your project there. So looking forward to it. And Casey, did you want to do a quick introduction there too?
Yes, my name is Casey Evans, and I'm a deputy prosecuting attorney with the Spokane County Prosecutor's Office and the attorney that represents the Newman Lake Flood Control Zone District.
Casey, yeah, Casey's helping us out quite a bit, especially with the Board of Appraisers getting started. More about that a little later. So, So, so welcome everybody. I think we'll go ahead and get started in the presentation. Yeah, and just a kind of a housekeeping note. If you could, well, let's see, if you could just type your questions in down at the bottom bar of your screen, there's a Q&A button. And if you have questions as you go along, you're welcome to type those in. And then when we get to the question slides at the end of each section, we'll take time to go through each one and address your questions. You can insert some comments in there as well, if you like. Okay, so welcome to the Newman Lake 2021 Fall Open House. Maybe we can go to the next slide. First, we thought we would kind of give everybody a little update on the capital budget award grant that we received. Just a little bit of background for those that may not have heard previously. We got an approximately a $400,000 award to evaluate the equipment and make repairs for our mostly for our aerator and alum injection systems, and just kind of a little timeline. We finished the RFQ and hired Jacobs Engineering back in August of 2020. And after finalizing the scope of work and the budget, they began the phase 1 of the project, which was kind of an evaluation of how the systems were working. And that was completed back in March. We made a presentation, and we'll go to the next slide. Kind of turn it over to Dawson there.
Yeah, so we had a presentation back in about, I think it was mid-March, where we presented to the community on the phase 1A report. And I just kind of pulled this straight out of that presentation. That the link to the presentation is in this PowerPoint right here. It's on our website as well. And kind of the goals of the phase 1A study were basically to determine the inefficiencies and possible problem areas associated with our hypolimeric oxygenation system and our alum system out there. And then as part of that, kind of a secondary part, Jacobs Engineering was going to offer recommendations for improvements within the confines of the award that we were given from the state. And that report is on our website, as well as the presentation, which is kind of just a brief explanation of the actual report. But what they kind of figured out in that report, which is really useful information for us, was that the required oxygen demand in the lake, so basically how much oxygen that the lake consumes in any one given season, is close to the oxygen generation capacity. So all of our equipment inside of the compressor building can generate enough oxygen to meet the demand. However, the actual in-lake equipment in the species cone, it can't actually deliver all of the oxygen that's supplied to it effectively. And so we've kind of changed our operations, and we'll talk about that a little bit based on their report. And like I said, you can visit our website and check out the past full report and the presentation. That's a lot more detailed. So kind of after phase 1, we jumped into phase 2, and Malcolm Hamilton was kind of the engineer, and Colin Little, they used to be kind of heading up this project. So Marianne and I have kind of taken it over since they both left. But basically the scope of work for phase 2 is for Jacobs Engineering to develop bid ready documents. So that's plan, specs, and estimate to give to Spokane County, to the district staff, so we can actually put this project out to bid and get contractors on board and start construction. So a little bit of a rough timeline. We're hoping for a final design end of October, and that gives us a little bit of time, district staff time to review the Jacobs Engineering submittals and kind of make it fit our typical bid structure. Then we're hoping to get out to bid sometime in November. And then kind of the earliest that we could actually award it and give the notice to proceed would be January. And then some of the equipment has pretty long lead times, particularly the AirSep. We're looking at possibly up to 4 months for equipment lead times, which would at the very earliest allow for completion of the project in May, but it's likely to be more like June. And so we're just kind of doing the best we can, meeting with Jacobs pretty often and answering any questions they have and trying to get through our reviews as quickly and as quickly as we can. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And so, like I said, like Marianne said earlier, we're just going to kind of take questions in between each little section of this presentation. So feel free to write your questions in the chat box.
Okay, we got a couple of questions. Lee Tate was asking if the cone capacity is 25% of supply capacity and 1/2 the supply capacity is operating, the system is overdriven. What action has been taken to reduce the supply capacity to better match the ability of the cone to absorb oxygen? Well, we have cut back to operating one AirSep and one compressor. So we've cut the supply into the cone in half. So how much do you expect to spend on the oxidation system in this year, including maintenance, electricity, and staff costs? We can get back to you on that. I don't have the top numbers off the top of my head. I don't know unless well, I could look it up somewhat quickly here. Especially the electricity costs. I don't have the cost, the staff costs split out, but I know that electricity is probably going to be around 21,000 this year, quite a bit lower because we're operating at a reduced capacity, so quite lower than was budgeted. The rest I'd have to yeah, the rest would be specifics that I'd have to get back to you on later, Lee. Yeah. Termometer first zoom to get the best lake water quality in the lake cone. Excuse me here. Sorry. Get the best lake water quality in the lake. The cone system needs to be increased significantly. Is that correct? Is that the goal? Now, Dawson, do you want to try to tackle that question? I think that kind of gets back to the results of the phase 1 report, which really recommended not trying to increase the capacity of the cone system, basically because we don't know if we could upgrade it. We'd have to increase the pressures, and we're not sure that it's capable. So those uncertainties have led us to an interim solution, and that's reducing the size of the pump. And then looking at another option for a long ways into the future. I don't know, Dawson, you want to mention that briefly? Or
yeah,
follow up anything I missed?
I was just thinking probably the best way for anyone who has questions, more in-depth questions on this sort of stuff. We did do a pretty detailed presentation on all of this back in March. And I would suggest that if you have questions, in-depth questions, go back and check that presentation out. and then maybe check out the report, and then feel free to email Marianne or I after with your question. But yeah, like Marianne said, Jacobs kind of didn't recommend, well, I shouldn't say kind of, they did not recommend us to try to increase the capacity to basically have the species cone absorb more oxygen, because there's just too much risk with it. We don't know the ratings on the species cone as far as pressure goes, and that's what it would take would be to increase the pressure inside of the species cone. And again, there's kind of some more specific stuff along with that, where it doesn't really matter when you increase the pressure inside of the cone. There gets to be a certain point where as soon as the water goes out of the cone, it'll flash back into actual oxygen, and it won't be dissolved in the water anymore because of just kind of general physical properties that are better understood than when they were when the species cone was created. So again, just kind of suggest, if you have more questions, check out that last presentation. Looks like there's another question. Are you planning to increase the capacity of the existing species cone under the capital budget? No, we're not going to increase the capacity of the species cone with the current money supply.
I guess what we are going to do is replace the larger pump with a smaller pump. That'll be more efficient. But the cone itself is not going to increase in questions in capacity.
Not seeing any more questions coming in.
Okay.
All righty.
Go to the next slide.
Yeah, so we're just gonna kind of discuss a little bit of kind of going into the operations this year, a bit of a timeline as far as what we've done this year for operations. So we turned the oxygenation system on in May, early May, and it was on for about a week. And then in that time period, we turned it off because we actually did a spot treatment, a topical spot treatment for alum. For anyone who didn't know, that kind of gets down to those dates below. What happened this year was we actually turned the alum system on early based on kind of recommendations from Jacobs, thinking that we needed to supply alum into the lake earlier on than we had maybe in the past. And what had happened is basically the lines got plugged pretty quickly. And we had already had lines that were plugged. And so what happened this time was it plugged the last line that we had free. And so we were out of commission. We kind of did everything that we possibly could think of. And we couldn't get the lines unplugged. And so Malcolm kind of came up with an idea. And actually, I think it came from one of our technicians out in the field. I think it was Dean, who just threw out the idea of, could we do a topical alum treatment? And so we went down that route this year of figuring out how to do that and do it responsibly and following all the permit guidelines and everything. And so we did that treatment. I believe it was that week of May 18th when we did it. And so we turned off the oxygen system during that time. And then we turned it back on after about 5-6 days after the treatment. And it was on until August 19th. And again, like Marianne said, we were running that system actually at half capacity. So that was one air sep and one compressor. And that was based off of the Jacobs engineering recommendation in the report. And so on August 19th, we got a report from one of our technicians out there that the air dryer was not doing good. I think it was, you kind of know maybe a little more of the specifics, Marianne, but it was leaking fluid. And we had Rogers Machinery, our contractor out there for the equipment, go and check on it. And they basically told us, with our proposed updates and renovations to that facility, they didn't really see it economically working out for them to actually, replace the air dryer when that's part of the project coming up. So around that same time, the lake was starting to mix as well. So we were getting some oxygenation already kind of naturally. So we kind of made the decision that we were, just going to turn the whole system off. And that's where we're at now. So any questions?
We had, or waiting to see if we had any others. We do have kind of a follow-up question from the last section. And it but an increased cone system would result in better water quality, correct? Yes, if we could, if it was economically feasible to do that or possible to do that, we could get a cone that designed or to maximize the oxygen supply getting into the lake than we have now. So not quite sure if I answered that question right, but I got your question. Okay, yes, all right. Will there need to be yearly alum treatments? We're actually hoping to get a little better answer on that from Jacobs, but generally surface lake alum treatments are done usually no more than every 5 years or more, 7, 8, even 10 plus years. Just depends on the lake. If that's what you're talking about in terms of alum treatments. And so one of the things that Jacob is hopefully helping us evaluate a bit is what's going to be the better option, the injection or the surface lake treatment. Do you attribute the later algae bloom to the topical application of alum this year? Do you want to tackle that one, Dawson? Do you want me to?
That's a pretty complicated question. I think we'll kind of address a little bit of that when we're talking about the water quality overview and just kind of a bunch of the factors that are influencing the water quality. But I don't know. That's a good question. I think it's hard to tell. I'd like to ask some more questions to a limnologist to know if why we had a little bit later of the algae bloom this year. From what I've gathered from the limnologists that I have talked to and other public health experts they're seeing this everywhere. This isn't just a Newman Lake thing. This is kind of right now, and the last couple of weeks have been the prime growing season. They typically see algae start to bloom pretty badly after the weather cools down. So I think there's a little bit of a correlation, and I don't fully understand this part. But basically, when you get the nutrient, when you have your lake start mixing, when the weather cools down, you allow your nutrients that were towards the bottom of the lake to basically cycle through. And now everything in the water column can kind of mix. And I think that may be something that's contributing to algae blooms that are later, kind of if the weather doesn't cool down till later in the season, then you won't see them till later in the season. But again, that's something that I think we need to discuss with the qualified limnologist to confirm or deny that for sure.
Yeah, I guess I'll add on to that. The lakes are really complex systems, and there's so many factors that it can be really difficult to sort all that out without quite a bit of detailed analysis. Next question. Alum is sitting on the lake bottom. Are wakes from surfing boats stirring the lake bottom? What happens if the alum comes to the surface?
I think we did pose that question to one of the limnologists that was kind of advising us on the alum treatment. And he basically said the alum is settling in the lake. And so that's why we turned off the system for about a week. And he said once it's on the bottom, it's, unless you have something, that's physically disturbing it, that is the deepest part of the lake. And that's why we did it there. And so he said it's likely that the boats are not mixing that alum or disturbing it down there. The second part to the question, what happens if the alum comes to the surface? I'm not really sure.
The alum kind of binds with the that's how it works, is in my kind of limited understanding of it. Basically, it binds, it flocculates the phosphorus and the sediment particles. So once it's sit on the bottom, I don't know that it disrupts that or actually becomes redissolves. I think it pretty much just sits down there. That's my understanding anyway. But
yeah, that was my understanding as well.
Are you talking about whole lake alum treatments? Is it 5 to 7 years? Yes, that's what I was talking about. But if it was part of the lake that was treated, should we treat should we treat another section of the lake? They didn't actually necessarily recommend that, but maybe Dawson, you can better answer that question.
What the limnologist said that we were talking to, it actually it was not 5 to 7 years. It was like 15 to 20 years for a whole lake alum treatment.
Okay.
That it typically lasted. That was, the extent that they gave us. So we kind of scaled that down based off of where we treated. So I think it's a conservative assumption that it's gonna be down there doing what it's supposed to be doing for about 5 years. But again, I think that's kind of what we're looking for from Jacobs, is a little recommendation and guidance on if we're going to go that route, how often should we treat?
Lake flip occurred between 8:15 and 8:23. Lake remained reasonably clear throughout July and half of August. Last year, the entire lake was cloudy from early July on. How much oxygen do you believe was absorbed by our cone by running at half capacity? Really, we don't have the data to answer that question. We're just operating it as best we can based on the recommendations we're getting.
Yeah, and I think that last question, how much oxygen do you believe was absorbed by our cone by running at half capacity? I think that the best answer that you're going to get to that question is in the Jacobs report. Just looking at the actual capacity of the existing species cone with no modifications, what can it absorb? And I think that's in there. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but it could be found in there.
Another alum question. Are there parts of the lake that are too shallow to treat with alum? Do you remember any of those discussions, or maybe I'm not even sure we can answer that at this point, but you have any thoughts, Dawson?
That's a good question. I'll jot that down. And because I'm not sure, that's a good question that we could ask someone who's, does limnology sort of stuff. All I can say to that point is that for cost effectiveness, we treated the deepest part of the lake because that's the part of the lake that goes anoxic typically. And so that's what they recommended, was to treat your the deepest parts of the lake, or the areas that have the deepest part of the lake. But we can try to find an answer to that question.
Okay.
I think that's it.
Okay. Next. Okay. The flood control zone district budget for 2022. That's what we've been working on here most recently, and that is trying to come up with a plan and a budget for what things we want to, what our goals are for next year and what we need to accomplish that. We've kind of taken a little different approach this year, I would say. Basically what we're going to try to do is maintain our current kind of ongoing operations, but also make sure that we can keep up with some of these extra special tasks that we've been working on here lately, and mainly the implementation of the capital grant and the Board of Appraisers. But what our baseline budget proposal is, it includes, maintaining our district flood control operations, supporting our dam safety issues, and addressing dam safety office concerns, and also potentially applying for some grant opportunities next year if we get the go ahead to consider decommissioning or other options to reduce the hazard of the dam. It also includes implementation of the capital grant that we discussed a little earlier. Continued operation of the water quality equipment after the completion of the capital grant. It also includes, working with ecology to update our alum injection permit if needed, and supporting the Board of Appraisers and updating the Newman Lake benefit maps, which we expect to probably continue through mid-year next year. This base budget includes just the basic minimum water quality monitoring that we'd been doing actually prior to this year. This year we did, at the recommendation of the advisory board, use some reserves to expand the monitoring. But our proposed budget just includes that baseline. Next slide. Okay, so we did work really hard to try to contain our costs. One of the things that we're able to do this year with some of our with new staffing is to shift some of our workload to our to Derek, our new water resource tech, and our admin specialist. It helps us out in terms of our county workload, and it also can help reduce some costs for Newman Lake. Also, we're going to use in-house staff. Dawson is going to be the project manager through construction, when we're going to use his staff time to oversee the construction implementation. If we had to hire the consultant down to do that, we probably wouldn't have a whole lot left for actually installing the equipment. So really, this is what we're proposing as kind of a baseline for a responsive, effective service, and maintaining our current operations and workload. We feel this is the lowest possible assessment for what we need to do. So next. So to do that, what we're proposing is a total of $289,000 roughly. The 2021 budget was about 255,000. So that's an increase of about 13%. That's based on about 12 man months worth of salaries, which is what we've been expending the last couple of years. And going over budget to do that. And it also includes about $32,000 in construction management expenses, and that's in the form of salary. One of the other savings, in addition to kind of shifting our workload a bit, that we're able to do is with the smaller pump and just running one half of the system, our electricity costs are lower. We expect next year they'll be right around 20,000, as we're probably going to end up this year. A great help has been the fact that the county commissioners have dedicated or have given the district $160,000 to pay the Board of Appraisers, and also, of course, the capital grant is going to be reimbursed as well. We maintained 40,000 in the budget for alum. May not be able to get it in early in the year, but to inject it in summer, fall as needed. And after all of that, what we're looking at in terms of reserves at the end of 2022 is about 32,000 in flood control side and 51,000 on the water quality side. Next slide. You know, we discussed with the this with the advisory board. They had some thoughts on maybe some potential add-ons. So we thought we would go ahead and lay those out. The advisory board, before making any recommendations on this, really wants to get your feedback, community feedback, before making a decision to move forward. So we've outlined these kind of for for your feedback and comment. Just so we would like to get either type your comments in, or we'll have some contact information at the end of the presentation as well. If you can get your comments in by Monday morning on the budget, we'd really appreciate it. We're trying to get this pinned down. We want to have it all finalized by the end of the month, and want to work with the advisory board to make that happen. So, okay, so back to the additional add-ons. If we wanted to continue the biweekly sampling that we've been doing this year, that's going to be at an additional about $12,000. That's an approximate 5% increase, an additional 5% increase. If we wanted to look at doing the surface alum treatment again next year that we did this year, that would be an additional $15,000. So basically what we'd use is the $40,000 alum budget that we would have done for the injection, and then added an additional 15. So that would be another about 6% increase. One of the things that we've talked about doing kind of preliminary to the last item is hiring an intern to kind of consolidate and get into a more usable form all the Newman Lake water quality data since we started doing it. And just because over the years things have been done in different formats, and it's probably a bit of a kind of a substantial effort, but with an intern we think we can economize on that. So So that's about $4,500 or 2% increase. And then just kind of as background, well, one of the things that was also considered was kind of getting a start on maybe looking at a limnologist to make some, to do a preliminary data review and start to make a little bit of progress towards maybe some recommendations. So, or putting in a grant for future work. So that we're estimating is at about 35,000 and would be an approximate 14% increase. So next slide. Risks. Thought we would kind of identify what areas or what could kind of risk us in these situation. One is on the capital grant. This work is a kind of really specialized. It's not usual kind of work, and so we're not quite sure how the bidding climate's going to work, especially with kind of COVID playing into the mix. There's some uncertainty there, but there also, our reserve balances, even with the assessment entries to cover kind of our basic work efforts, the reserve balances are still pretty borderline. The 32, for example, the 32,000 in flood control probably wouldn't cover having to scrape the sump if we got flooding and had to got a lot of sediment in the sump and had to clean it. The dam, the work that we might have to do to either decommission the dam, although we'd be going for grants, there's probably going to have to be some matching funds on that, and this budget wouldn't cover that. Really do need to look at building our reserves. The positive side of that, next year after the implementation of the benefit updates, might be a better opportunity to examine that option in the future. But that's just something to keep in mind. Next. Yeah, so questions, comments, let's see.
Yeah, there's kind of one thing that I wanted to mention, Marianne, and is that part of the reason for this, well, I'm going to go back a little bit. For some of these add-ons, in the past, what we had done in the past 2 years before this year, we had done 5 water quality sampling events, and those were strictly what was required by the NPDES permit for us to basically meet the permit guidelines bare minimum. And with 5 sampling events scattered throughout, between April and October, you can't really actually draw any conclusions at all because there's so much variability between each sampling event. And so something that the district staff kind of discussed with the advisory board was looking at getting more data. And so that's why this year we increased our sampling to every other week, to be able to gather more data, to have a little bit better of a picture of what's going on out at the lake. And just another kind of note about that, in order to include that data in a formal document, we produce the state of the lake report every year that we submit to ecology. It needs to be done by qualified professionals, or at least through a quality assurance plan, quality control and quality assurance. And so currently right now, we can't allow the community to collect data and us use that in the reports because we don't have any QA/QC process. And so that's something that we'd like to look into with ecology on what they would require for us to be able to have volunteers do collect more field data. But it's just quite a bit of coordination that we have to do through ecology, because it's you know, there's permit requirements and specific things that we actually have to do. And so anyways, what I'm trying to get at is this is the additional bi-weekly sampling and some of the gathering and compiling the data would basically help a qualified limnologist be able to look at the data and evaluate and draw some conclusions and help inform a management plan. So just a note on that. Looks like there's still a couple more questions. I can read this one, Marianne. If 12K and 15K isn't added, then alum cannot be added to the lake in the spring, correct? Didn't the limnologist that guided this year's surface alum treatment say that the spring was a better time to add alum to the lake than the fall? I can try to answer that one. So if 12K and 15K is added, so well, basically what I can say on that is if the 15K is not added, then there's no money to do the surface alum treatment, and likely we won't be able to do the injection because the project will not be done by the springtime. So yes, that means that we wouldn't necessarily have a way to get alum in the lake in the springtime. And then the second part of the question was basically, did the limnologist suggest that springtime was better? Yes, that was a pretty big conclusion that we drew from speaking to the limnologist, was that springtime, there's less algae, there's less macroinvertebrates in the water at that time, and it allows the phosphorus to settle down and to actually settle to the bottom and cap the sediments. And so one of the things they mentioned is if you do the treatment in the fall, you're going to get your alum binding to suspended solids in the water column, which maybe will be algae or other things floating in the water. And they said that it's not going to be as effective. There's another comments that basically just says nitrogen can't be done by anyone but a lab. So that was another thing we added this year, was looking at to the water quality sampling. We added taking nitrogen samples as well to see if we're low phosphorus concentrations, are we also low nitrogen, or just trying to figure out which one's contributing to the algae growth. And this is true. There's quite a few parameters that we do monitor that cannot be taken in the field, and they have to be done by a lab.
Marianne, did you see the two questions in chat?
We'll bring those up. Okay, so looking ahead, what's the latest on the linear oxygenator versus the current cone or large cone? Thank you. I think this kind of gets back to what Dawson was saying. It kind of refers back to that phase one report. I don't know, did you want to try to answer that in general, Dawson, or
Yeah, I mean, I can keep it really general. I think the short answer is it's something that is kind of in the long-term plan. I think what we've discussed with the advisory board and the feedback that we have got from the community is the linear diffuser is something that we'd like to do. It's really only, according to the phase 1A reports, it's the only viable option for Newman Lake that we know of. But currently there's no funding available for that right now. So we're looking in to get a scope and budget from one of our consultants to see how much it would cost to put together a cost estimate for that sort of stuff. But it is one of those things where we've discussed with them a little bit, and material costs right now they're very volatile. And so between when they produced that report and now, they told us that the supplier for the line diffuser, and there's only one in the whole United States, that material costs doubled. And so that's not to say that it's going to continue to go up, but we're not really sure where it's at. So it's a bit of an unknown as to when we can do it. And if we want to do it, we need to get a preliminary design and a better cost estimate for it. So that's kind of where we're at with the linear diffuser.
Okay. Second question in the chat box. Is it possible to collect boat launch fees to help offset the costs for improving lake water quality? I think can answer that one. Right now, the way the funding is set up for the flood control zone district is strictly based on benefit assessments. And, you know, properties and benefit assessments. The boat launch does contribute to that. Even though Fish and Wildlife owns it, they do pay an assessment. However, you know, actually collecting boat fees isn't possible right now. It's not to say that there isn't some options for that couldn't be reviewed in the future, but as it stands now, it's not possible. I don't know if any other, do I think that's
it.
Okay. Well, we thought we would take a little bit of a break here because we do have some more of the presentation to go. So if folks want to take a little stretch or run get some coffee or whatever, we'll try to come back. Let's see, it's 5:55. Look at that. Okay, so let's get back here. We'll kind of restart about 6 o'clock, and you can all take a little stretch. So thanks, everybody. See you in about 5 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Next subject is lake level management, and turn it back over to Dawson there, so he's gonna talk about what our lake level's been looking like this year.
Yeah, so just kind of want to give a quick overview as to how we, for anybody who doesn't know how it kind of works out there as far as lake level management. We kind of every spring we look at the snowpack up on the upper watershed on Quartz Peak and some of the other snow telesites that we have that basically tell us how much precipitation, how much actual, it's something called snow water equivalent, how much water is contained inside a snowpack. And based off of that, we have a model that was produced quite some time ago that can help us estimate how much water we're going to have coming into the lake. And so based off of that, that helps us kind of determine how we operate the gates, letting water stay in the lake or letting it out, and such. And so this year, this is kind of our lake level curve that we keep track of. We have a technician out in the field who lives pretty close by our outlet gates, and they can take readings for us really anytime we need it. Depending on the time of year, they'll go anywhere from once a week to 4 or 5 times a week, depending on the time of the year. And so, as you all probably know, and as this curve kind of shows us, what you're looking at right here is our goal elevation is in orange. And that's based off of the graph that's been approved in the policy and procedures manual. And then the blue here is actual elevations of the lake. And so what we've kind of experienced this year is a really tough year. In the upper watershed, we had actually a little bit, about average, a little bit over normal snowpack in upper parts of the watershed. But we got pretty warm weather early on in the lower watershed. And so that actually ended up, we lost most of our lower watershed snowpack really early on, like back in February. And then the model that we have that kind of predicts the amount of water coming off from the watershed is based on the upper watershed. And so the forecast that we had wasn't quite that accurate. And so that combined with really basically no precipitation since, very, very early spring in March or so, we've had the outlet gates closed since the middle of April, and we have not been able to get the water elevations up in the lake all summer. And I don't know, I did send out a notification was sent out to the community earlier this year, back in June. But the Department of Ecology actually issued droughts for every single county, I believe, except for 2, and I believe that was King County and maybe Pierce County. And they were drought declarations. And we have experienced the driest, I think it was the driest, I can't remember the dates, but the springtime in over 100 years this year. So you can kind of see that here on this graph that we are significantly struggling for water storage. And it's not just Newman Lake, it's kind of all of the Northwest, unfortunately. And so that's kind of where we're at. We have received some new readings that this graph just hasn't been updated, but we are actually below our winter pool elevation right now. Even with the recent rains that we had in the past, we're still sitting about 1/10 of a foot below our winter pool elevation already, unfortunately. So hopefully, I think there's some predicted rains in the future, and hopefully that'll kind of give us a little more water. But here is the same data tabulated out. I don't expect anyone to read this right now, but really all this is the date of each reading, and the actual reading, the goal reading here, and then the difference between the two. in feet here and in inches. And you can kind of see what we've been experiencing this year. We had that really hot weather towards the end of June, the hot 120, 115 degree weather that we had. And we significantly started to drop. You can see here, we were around 4 inches. And then a couple weeks later, few weeks later, we're almost 7 inches below the target elevation. So you can see how the lack of water and the heat has been affecting the lake levels. I'm not seeing any questions coming in, but I'll pause a little bit to see if anybody has any comments or questions on this sort of stuff. Alrighty, not seeing anything come in, so kind of moving on to the water quality overview, and yeah, just the water quality side of what we're doing out there. So as we were talking about earlier, we do district staff along with our consultant TO engineers. We do in-lake monitoring. And we have an NPDES permit, which is basically guides us and dictates what we're allowed to do out there as far as injecting alum into the lake. And it requires monthly sampling during, well, it has some pretty specific requirements as far as sampling to operate the alum system. And so we typically had done 5 sampling events between May and September. And here, this little graphic here on the right kind of shows you about where we sample. Those are very approximate locations, and I will say probably needs to be updated because that Mid-Lake Station sample is it's not accurate. But it's kind of a general area of where we're doing our sampling. So we sample in the North Lake, the Mid Lake, and the South. And then we also sample, depending on the parameter that we're sampling for, we either sample the surface, middle, and the bottom, or for example, the field parameters like temperature and DO, we sample actually every meter. And that kind of helps us get a better water profile of what's going on out there. And then as Marianne and I kind of were mentioning earlier, we did increase the sampling this year. So we have, instead of 5 sampling events, there's actually 13 sampling events, and that allows us to sample every other week. I think we started sampling the last week of April, and we're going to continue sampling. I think we have 2 more. We have one tomorrow and then one in a couple more weeks. So it's good data that we're collecting. So something we kind of wanted to discuss about was just general factors and kind of changes in this year's water season at the lake. I don't know if anybody saw the notice go out, but we did send a kind of a fact sheet, I guess I would say, on general water quality factors out there at the lake, because we were seeing some pretty good clarity. We actually had many residents reach out to us stating that the clarity was really, they could see pretty deeply in the lake for quite some time. And so we just kind of wanted to make everyone aware of all of the complexities of stuff going on at the lake this year. So the first one that we wanted to chat about was the alum. So obviously this year we haven't operated the alum system the way that it has been done in the past. We did the topical surface spot treatment. So that's kind of an unknown variable in its effects to water quality. We've also had a pretty significant drought, meaning basically no precipitation throughout the summer. So we're not having a lot of dilution from rain events, but we're also not having necessarily as much erosion caused by by those rain events. So as you all may be aware, with the erosion comes sediment, and attached to that sediment is nutrients, phosphorus and nitrogen, that come into the lake and can affect water quality, primarily feeding algae. So another thing, kind of an unknown variable, is the heat we've had this year. As you've all experienced, it's been an amazingly hot summer, and it didn't really relent for most of summer until pretty recently. So that's a big variable that we're hard to know how that's affected the lake. And then another one, the sediment load. So again, we didn't have really a peak flow come into the lake this year because of this strange watershed kind of the runoff patterns that we saw this. And so it was a pretty steady flow, low steady flow from end of January or early February to early April. And so we think associated with that, there's also a reduced sediment load because you're not having as much water come down the inputs, such as Thompson Creek and Mountain View and Temple Creek and those other inlets into the lake. One of the other ones is we changed the way that we were doing the milfoil treatment this year. And I'll kind of let Derek talk a little bit about that more here in a bit. But, you know, with the fall milfoil treatment, when you do the milfoil treatment, you are killing those plants. And when you kill those plants, you do have decomposing material in the lake. And so typically that's done earlier on in the season. And so that material is decomposing throughout the summer. And when organic material decomposes, it consumes oxygen, which depletes the dissolved oxygen levels in the lake. And so we didn't really have that going on this year as much because we didn't treat the milfoil until actually on Monday. So that's another variable that's pretty different from what we've done in the past, as well as the last one, that running the oxygen equipment at half capacity. So there's quite a bit going on. Unfortunately, you can't really draw any conclusions from one thing, because as you can see here, there's a lot of factors that are different this year that really affect the water quality and make it extremely difficult to draw conclusions. So I'll just kind of pause here for any questions if anybody has any, or comments. Not seeing any come in. Another question, any water rights issues in the canal? I assume that they're maybe talking about since the water is low this year, they may not be able to draw water from the canal. I don't believe we received actually any calls or concerned citizens this year, you know, asking what's going on. I don't know if it's just because we're all kind of experiencing it together or what, but I'm not aware of any. I don't know if you are, Marianne.
No, I wasn't either. So just.
Okay. Alrighty, well, moving on to some of the concerns, the water quality concerns that we're aware of out there. And I believe this first part, I'm going to turn it over to Derek to chat a little bit about some of the invasive species in milfoil out there.
Yeah, so the district has been treating milfoil for quite some time. These efforts have slowed the spread and prevented wide-scale infestation. Milfoil spreads quite easily through fragmentation, Each fragment can settle in the sediment and grow roots, which forms dense mats along the shoreline and crowds out native aquatic vegetation, as well as inhibits recreation. And the plants die back in the fall, but the root system survives the winter, permitting the plant to grow in the springtime. So we had a Department of Ecology grant that was funding a lot of these efforts that expired last year. So our funding came from the Newman Lake budget this season. As a result, the approach was to target areas of highest concentrations in an effort to keep the spread at bay. Unfortunately, with this approach, eradication is unlikely. To completely rid Newman Lake of milfoil would likely need a full lake treatment, as well as measures to prevent the reintroduction, which would likely be a costly endeavor. Currently, we're evaluating strategies to improve milfoil management moving forward. You can go to the next slide there, Dawson. So yeah, as you mentioned, this past Monday, we performed our first treatment, the only treatment of the year, which was 58.5 acres in the areas that you can see along the map. These areas were identified as the highest concentration when we conducted our surveys in early July. Additionally, residents of Newman Lake privately contracted with Aquatic Weed Solutions approximately 100 hours of diver suction weeding. All these efforts are essential at keeping the spread at bay. But there are some steps that individuals can do to aid in this effort, such as cleaning your watercrafts before and after each use to prevent fragments from entering the lake, as well as draining all water from the boats. It's also important to dispose of any plant fragments that you find in the garbage so as to not propagate into the lake. Additionally, avoiding boating in areas where milfoil is observed because the props can rip up the plants and spread, as well as hiring contractors for diver suction weeding, as many residents have done this year. Yeah, that's about it for milfoil.
Yeah, so next thing, kind of moving on, other water quality concern, that is blue-green algae. And you can kind of see here in these photos, these are actually from the last 2 days. The photo here on the left was from Honeymoon Bay. That was taken this morning, and the photo there on the right is from Shadow Bay. And these are suspected blue-green algae blooms. And the way, just a little bit of background and understanding on algae is not all algae is toxic, not all algae is blue-green algae. But just another thing, cyanobacteria and blue-green algae are synonymous. So they mean the same thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're toxic. It just means that they could produce toxins. And so we took a test for cyanobacteria toxins yesterday, 9/14, and we also took another one of this blue, the blue slime here today. And we touched base with SRHD, and they typically won't recommend taking water quality or toxin samples, back to back. They typically recommend about a week in between, but because we saw such a drastic change, as you can see here, here's this green, kind of more lighter stuff, and same with on this picture on the right, but then this darker blue. It was actually thick. It was almost a little bit looking like fondant on a cake. So it was pretty nasty stuff. And so we actually have a plan that works through one of the community members out at the lake. They're kind of trained in filling out all the correct paperwork, and they have the sampling equipment, and they can go out and sample for us, which saves the district quite a bit of time and money. It saves any staff at least 2.5 hours probably trying to go drive out there, locate the actual bloom, sample, deliver it, and then go back. So depending on how many samples we do, it does save quite a bit of money. And just kind of a note there at the bottom, if you do see blooms such as the ones here in these photos, please text the number there. You can even call, but preferably text and send photos and location, and we'll do our best to try to sample it. Another note on there is that it's not on this slide, but we have to send our toxin samples all the way over to the west side to the King County labs. And so we have to overnight it. And obviously their lab only operates between Monday and Friday. And so we really only have a sampling window between Monday early morning and the latest is Thursday early morning, preferably Wednesday night. So we really have a very short window of when we can sample during the week to be able to get the results back before the weekend, or even have a valid test to be done. Because if it gets to the lab too late in the week, it's basically ruined because they won't be able to do it before the weekend. Any questions here? I think we have a couple. Looks like there's a question. We have been told for years that herbicides in the lake have highly reduced efficacy when applied when the plants are not uptaking nutrients in their dormant season. What effectiveness do you expect from the expense occurring next week to kill more milfoil? Any? I can speak to that just a little bit based off of this year. As you probably all saw out in the community, we were going to do that treatment quite a bit earlier in the season. And we got pretty overwhelming feedback from the community not to do it when we wanted to do it. And so we kind of had two options: do it in the fall or don't do it at all. And because the milfoil has grown up quite a bit, we decided to do it in the fall. But we didn't make that decision on our own. We did consult with ecology and their aquatic invasive species specialists. And they said they don't really actually see much of a difference in effectiveness in the fall. And that they said as long as the plant is still, it hasn't, shrunk back down to its dormant size, it's still going to be pretty effective. As to measuring that effectiveness, the only way to do that would really be to do a whole lake survey, a very detailed one. You need diving and that sort of stuff. And so I don't know if you have any more to say on that, Derek, but feel free.
Yeah, you kind of touched on everything, but another kind of positive for doing it later in the season is that in the springtime, the plant vegetative mass is not very tall, very large, and so there's less of the plant that is absorbing nutrients. So with it being larger, we researched and learned that it has the potential to be more effective, and we're able to target the approach a little bit better because we know where they're all at, the highest concentration of plants. And as you said earlier too, reducing the amount of decomposing plant matter in the springtime, when that can have a substantial, or that can have an effect on the water quality.
Yeah. Looks like another question. If the water level is very low in the lake, then does the dam get closed, eliminating any outflow and thereby maintaining a decent water level in the lake? Yeah, the outlet gates at the lake have been closed since April 15th. They've been fully shut, and there's a significant amount of evaporation that happens. So we'd like to maintain a decent water level in the lake, but you can't make water. So another question, wouldn't treatment be best during or after lake turnover in the fall, since you say it takes up oxygen? What I was saying earlier about the plants taking up oxygen is that when they're decomposing, so after they're dying, they take up oxygen to decompose. And so I'm not sure if they're taking up oxygen when they're still alive, going dormant. But that was kind of more in reference to after they're dying. Just organic matter has to consume oxygen in that process, and so it wouldn't necessarily apply to this scenario as much, because that plant matter is still alive until it's not. And I did misspeak. This photo here on the right, I believe this was actually in Hampton Bay, not Shadow Bay, but it was submitted yesterday morning. And I will kind of let everybody know, we have been getting more, especially within the last week. We've been getting more reports of concentrated algae that look more like this one on the right. This is the first one that we've had that looks like the one left today.
There was one more question, Dawson, that popped up there while you were.
Oh yeah. If families are using the lake mostly in July and August, can milfoil treatment occur in June? Is June a good compromise? I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Marianne, I believe that's when it's happened in the past. The only problem with that is you have to get a good survey to know where the milfoil is so you can treat it. And I don't remember why we weren't able to do it. I think we did do a survey. Maybe Derek, you can speak to that a little more.
Yeah, that was our intention at first, and we went out in May and performed a survey, but we didn't see any. Well, that's not true. We saw a few, so we only had a couple GPS points.
Right. Yeah.
And so it was either just kind of guess where we thought they might be, but since we kind of had limited funds, we didn't want to we didn't want to waste it in that manner. And so we waited a little longer. So we did it in early July when the plants had grown up taller and we knew exactly where the biggest clusters were. Hence the later treatment this season.
Yeah, so a big part of the milfoil treatment that we've been learning from our contractor is you got to have, especially for a more eradication plan, you have to have a very well done survey, and that includes diving. So you'd actually have to get divers out there to look, because you can't see everything from the boat, especially once it starts getting deeper. And when you do, some people do grab samples where you throw out a rake and you kind of pull it in to see what's out there. And from what we were told from our contractor, they said it's not very effective. There's also some other ways to do like acoustic surveys, and they also say really that just picks up all plant mass, and it's very difficult to distinguish between the different types of plants, and especially non-native and native plants. Okay, so kind of getting back to this, the water quality problems and the algae stuff. Algae needs nutrients to grow, and it's a major reason why we have the water quality issues that we do. And it's because we have excess nutrients. And if for anyone who doesn't know, Newman Lake has a TMDL, which is a total maximum daily limit for total phosphorus, or total maximum daily load. and that concentration is 20 micrograms per liter. And that study was done by the Department of Ecology, which basically says that we need to try to get Newman Lake in the upper water column to that concentration throughout the summer months. And so these are right here on the slide. You can see a lot of the nutrient sources that we have at Newman Lake. You get some nutrient sources from groundwater inflow. More anthropogenic sort of things are human created. Nutrient sources are fertilizers. So, your green grass that runs right up to the lake. Anytime that there's excess fertilizer, that has the potential to go straight into the lake, and that's just feeding the lake for nutrients, and it will feed algae. Sediment from eroding lake shores, that's another potential thing. When the sediment gets knocked into the lake, it does contain nutrients bound to that sediment. Another thing is the septic system. Those can leach nutrients into the lake. Kind of the same thing, the stormwater runoff or inflow, it can contain sediment, which it also contains nutrients and will feed algae. And then you also have the, so animal feces. So any kind of animal has nutrients in their feces, or really any decomposing animal or organic organism in the lake or around the lake. It's basically going to get into the lake eventually. And then you also have, the fish in the lake. They can stir up the sediments on the bottom, and also when they die, they decompose and they have quite a bit of nutrients in them as well. So what can you do to reduce your contribution? There's quite a bit of things you can do as a resident. You can try to go fertilizer free, or at least phosphates and phosphorus free in your fertilizer. Don't put your yard trimmings in or near the water. Again, like I said earlier, the way that any watershed works is when you have something in that watershed, it's always going to go to the lowest point, and the lowest point in this watershed is in the lake. So what you do in your own watershed is going to affect your lake. So plant a native shoreline buffer that helps basically stop or reduce the flow from stormwater on either lawns or roads or whatever it may be. And it also allows the plants to uptake the phosphorus and nitrogen and other nutrients, and it will feed the plants. Scoop and dispose of pet waste in the garbage, not near the lake. And then another thing is washing your cars or boats or whatever it may be with phosphorus-free soap. And if you can, don't do it on an impervious surface. Also, if you have a paved area, try to do it on a lawn instead, so you're feeding living material instead of it just washing into the lake. And then some farmer strategies. The Spokane Conservation District has quite a bit of programs that they'll actually pay you for the land that you maybe historically had farmed, and they'll come in and plant native grasses and native buffers, and again, they'll pay you like you were growing the crops or whatever it may be in that area. They also can offer a little bit of assistance doing some nutrient management stuff, as well as you could do a manure management plan on try to figure out ways you can dispose of your manure or use it in other ways that don't contribute to excess nutrients. Alrighty. Looks like we have one question. Does the district agree that conventional septic systems, regardless of age or condition, do nothing to remove phosphorus or nitrogen from reaching the water in our lake? I don't really have understanding of septic systems well enough to know conventional septic system from something else. I don't know, Marianne, if you have any thoughts or input on that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a bit of a blanket statement, but definitely if the conventional system is not operating effectively, if it's an installed, for example, in an area with a high water table or something like that, then I can see, yeah, definitely you're going to have some contributions there. Properly operating and setback, I do think that there probably is some removal, but I'm not an expert on that, so probably would have to research to better answer that question.
Got another question. Can you share the link for the program that will pay to plant native species? Yeah, we can do that. And I'll just kind of verbally tell you a couple, two of them that I know of. One is the Spokane Conservation District. That they primarily work with farmers and ag producers. The Lands Council can maybe be, they're another conservation or preservation nonprofit here in Spokane, and they've been kind of working with the Newman Lake Property Owners Association to try to do some education and outreach, and they might be able to provide some technical assistance on what to plant. I don't know if they can supply. They may be able to supply at least one plant, but yeah, we can definitely give you the link. I think the best way is we'll just post it on to the Newman Lake Flood Control Zone District webpage, and maybe you can even put it in the chat. There's just a comment there. If there's no more questions, I think we'll move on to the next part. Okay, so just a little bit about partnerships and programs for Newman Lake. There's quite a bit going on out at Newman Lake. There's a lot of different agencies and groups and awesome people with their hands in some projects that are trying to benefit the water quality and the overall health of the lake. And so just a quick go over these things. Dr. Sue's here to talk a little bit about the Beaver Dam Analog project with the Lands Council and Gonzaga University. Before she does that, I'm just going to kind of talk about the other little things going on. The Spokane Conservation District has a septic implementation program that they're doing, and they've done feasibility studies out there. They've got hundreds of thousands of dollars in grant funding for Newman Lake, and they've been doing some really awesome research out there. I believe they're also working on the Lake Carrollcade program to try to help produce or help inform and work with property owners to be able to plant native buffers and kind of go reduce their nutrient input. The Newman Lake Property Owners Association has also been really helpful and instrumental in getting a lot of information out and putting together information such as the Love Newman Lake program, which you can go check out on the Newman Lake Property Owners Association website. And then the Conservation District also has done a wave study for erosion out at Newman Lake, and there's the link here in this PowerPoint to that report. It's also on our website, but I am going to let Dr. Sue kind of take it over and talk about, I don't know if you want this slide right here, but I'll let you go.
All right, thanks, Dawson. I'll give you a break from talking too, I guess, right? Well done so far. Ultimately, I'm Dr. Sue from Gonzaga University. I'm faculty in civil engineering and have been working with the Lands Council and members of the Lands Council to implement simulated beaver dams in rivers throughout the, we've done 2 different projects in the Hangman Creek watershed. And there the goal was to use these beaver dams to slow down flow and create a pond, more of like a ponding environment, which would allow sediment to settle out, and then also maybe raise the level of the riverbeds back up so that it could reconnect water to the floodplain and create more of a storage environment with respect to restoring water and storing sediment. And then we came across, of course, we were familiar with the problems of phosphorus getting into Newman Lake and also from Thompson Creek. And the TMDL report that Dawson was referring to indicated that about 42% of the phosphorus load was into Newman Lake was coming from Thompson Creek drainage, the watershed in Thompson Creek itself. And if you look at this particular diagram that Dawson has on the screen here of Thompson Creek, it essentially, the creek in the lower section where it outlets into Newman Lake, in the bottom there, you can see the sediment plume. And from this just one picture, sort of a sediment plume coming out of the river. In particular, because this creek basically looks like a superhighway, right? And so it is straightened and it has been straightened and sort of ditched in order to help promote to use the floodplain area for ag and so on and so forth in the past. And the TMDL report had suggested that one way to maybe think about help managing the phosphorus loads and sediment loads moving in and through this creek is to restore these ditched and straightened channels back to more a more rough condition in order to allow for more storage, to slow down the flow, create more ponding and create more sedimentation in the creek, which also can then keep the phosphorus sort of in and create like a wetland environment where it will allow the phosphorus to be uptake by the vegetation and the plants rather than just sort of transporting down into the lake. And so we saw this with Beaver Dam Analogs. So beaver dams are once again great at creating that ponding environment and allowing sediment to fall out along with the phosphorus along with it. And so we saw this as an opportunity to implement simulated beaver dams. To have actual beaver come in and implement their own dams, they need vegetation. They need wood in order to do that. And there is some riparian or vegetation along the stretch of Thompson Creek, but there's not enough there to sustain an actual beaver population to have them do this work for us. And so there has been this movement to simulate their dams in other locations where the wood is not present for the beaver to do it themselves. And we would get the same function from simulated beaver dams as you would from natural beaver dams, which then also maybe might promote way down the line and that vegetation growth that maybe could sustain a beaver population to maintain the dams down the line. But the goal here is that we spent the last year, I had a senior design team and senior tech elective students work on a design for a set of simulated beaver dams, which will act effectively like speed bumps, right, in this superhighway. And attempt to slow down the flow, create the ponding, get the sediment to fall out with the phosphorus and retain the phosphorus in the creek to then get uptake by the vegetation in the plants, which also we're going to work on supplementing the riparian zone and doing some plantings out here too to bring back some of the woody vegetation, which will gain more water access by raising the channel bed back up and allowing the water to flood again and feed the plants as well. So ultimately, Dawson, if I can share my screen, are you sharing yours right now? Yeah.
Yeah, I am. Let me stop sharing it.
So you can remember that, and I will show you. Share. Can you see pictures of Beaver Dam Analogs, Dawson?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. So really the picture you just saw, right, that Dawson had up there, this is the same stretch of creek. And this is the design that we have worked out with the Lands Council and my students to implement a series of simulated beaver dams down through this stretch of Thompson Creek. And there's a variety of different types of beaver dams there, but ultimately they all are going to act like roughness features and speed bumps to create ponding and to slow flow and to get the sediment and the phosphorus to fall out. And so you can see here, we're going to implement something like 18 different beaver dam structures, which will look, each one will look somewhat similar to these. These are examples of 2 different simulated beaver dams or beaver dam analogs that we did at Rattlers Run Creek. A single post with essentially beaver dam analogs are posts pounded in perpendicular to flow, and then we weave vegetation material through that to create the dam. And then you also can pack it with mud and rocks and so on and so forth, like the beaver would do, to create a more sealed up dam structure. And so beaver dams, natural beaver dams, are in series. You need multiple, they build them, the beaver build them in series and multiple versions of them to create a more slowed down flow environment, and so that the dams can survive longer, right? So they build them in series and a whole bunch of them so that they can protect each other and that the dams stay in place so that they can have their ponded water and their ponds to live in and survive in. And so we are building quite a few of them in series to help make them more sustainable, right? To higher flows, particularly in the springtime and the like. And so the goal is to put in quite a few so that you can create a more slowed down environment, depositional environment, to get sediment and to maintain the structure of the dams themselves, and then have them function to retain water and sediment and phosphorus, right? And so these are just some pictures of what they'll look like. And they're fairly easy to build. We just need a post pounder or students with sledgehammers. That's what I like to say, right? Anyway, post pounder and the like to get the posts in, and then just the time spent and the material spent to weave the vegetation in between and to seal up each dam. And then this is in the lower right here. This is one acting in California Creek in Hangman Creek watershed, and you can see the ponding that is generated behind it. And that, whereas it almost like a bathtub, when water comes into a bathtub, it would basically just let the sediment fall out behind it. And the goal is, once again, to try to create a lot of storage for water, sediment, and phosphorus by creating these sort of speed bumps in flow to help promote that. We have been doing some monitoring this past year on phosphorus concentrations currently in Thompson Creek, and we've been collecting some monthly samples. And then having them, our chemistry lab here on campus has done some testing on total phosphorus concentration, so we can see sort of what baseline is right now. And then also we'll collect some additional baseline data before the BDAs get implemented. The Lands Council is working with the Department of Ecology on grants. They're in the process of negotiations to finalize the grants that will fund the construction and the building of these Beaver Dam analogs in Thompson Creek. And the goal is, hopefully, if all still goes well with our negotiations with ecology and the grant comes through, that we hope to build these in October sometime, right? We haven't finalized the deadline on that yet because we're still waiting to work through the funding it's very promising, and it's going to happen. It's just details getting through there. So hopefully they'll be built in October. And then my students this year will look at, we also have developed a quality assurance project plan for the Department of Ecology to monitor phosphorus and the impact that these Beaver Dam analogs will have, and see if it is going to reduce phosphorus loads down close to that TMDL, if not lower. And so we, over the next 3 years, we'll be monitoring in particular total phosphorus concentrations, both what's coming in on the upstream end of the complex, and then we'll capture some samples in the middle to sort of see the effectiveness of part of the complex, and then collect samples and look at what's coming out downstream once it's worked its way through all of the BDAs. And so then we can see, and then also we'll be monitoring that over time and making some changes in adaptive management to the BDAs as we learn more about how effective they are being in that. So there you go. That is the Beaver Dam analog project. And like I said, we'll hopefully, the build day will hopefully happen sometime in October, and that the Lands Council, I'm sure, is in contact with Spokane County, and they're in contact with others in the Newman Lake Properties Owners Association and that, and probably could love some help in coming out to build some Beaver Dam analogs and weave some material in between. It's like basket weaving, right? So we would love to have people come out and help us install them as well. So if there are any questions, I will stop sharing. I don't know if that covers it pretty good, Dawson.
Yeah, awesome. That was great. Thank you. Yeah, we can kind of, I'm not seeing any questions, but if any do come up, we can
Great.
go through them. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Sue, for sitting in and sharing your wealth of knowledge. and expertise. Looks like we did get one. If Thompson Creek contributes 42%, what does your project hope to reduce the percent?
Well, that's a good question. Ideally, we're trying to just look at reducing the concentration back down, so that the concentration coming out of the complex to the 20 parts per billion or micrograms per liter. It's a good, basically we're going to monitor and see, and then if based on the results of that and where we get with the percentage sort of coming out, or how much reduction we're getting, we can make adjustments maybe to the Beaver Dam Analog adaptive manage and see if we can reduce it more. But the goal is that it'll capture a lot of it, but nothing's ever 100% efficient, right? So as much as we possibly can. I don't have an actual number on how much exact percentage we will see. These are fairly new structures being implemented as best management practices for sediment, and actually don't know if any of I don't think they've actually been applied necessarily for phosphorus reduction. So we're going to learn a lot from this sort of as a pilot project to then show the effectiveness of it and determine how much they will actually reduce, and then if they do very well, then we can look at applying these in other locations too for this same type of goal. So we'll learn from it as we do. And overall, they're fairly inexpensive to install. All of those there are about like a total of about $5,000 to just build those structures. So it's not a very big cost investment to put them in. So in the end, I think it could be a really good bang for the buck, I guess.
Yeah. Someone's asking where will the dates and locations for volunteering be posted? I think we can send that out. Yeah. District staff can send that.
Yeah, once we finalize it, like I said, we're going to go out on September 29th and try to mark locations for it, and then hopefully we'll know by then if the grant has been finalized. The negotiations are just taking a little bit. And then once the Lands Council knows that the grant funding is finalized, then they have to procure all the materials, and then we'll get out there so we can communicate with Dawson and he can get it posted.
Definitely. Yeah. Someone's asking, will you be putting in trees and plants for peat uptake?
Yes. Yeah, so they'll do some riparian bed. The Lands Council, actually, that's what the Lands Council mostly does, right? A huge aspect of what the Lands Council does is replanting and getting vegetation back out into watersheds and into floodplains. And so that is part of the plan too, to supplement the Beaver Dam analogs with vegetation. We may have to wait a year or two because currently the state of Thompson Creek, with it being straightened and ditched, has basically the bottom of the channel has dropped out. So it's a really deep channel. And as a result, that's drawn down the groundwater table with it. And so to get water to, if you plant new vegetation in that floodplain right now, the groundwater table is pretty low. So you have to sort of water a lot of those plants to keep them going. The goal of this is as you get that sediment to drop out and accumulate, the channel bottom moves up, brings the groundwater table up with it, and then that can feed that vegetation. So it might take a little time to get that groundwater table back up to sustain that planting of vegetation. But over time, yes, we hope to bring in the vegetation there too to help with the uptake.
Awesome. Someone asked, after you prove them successful, do you plan to do the same on the ditch channel directly to the east of Thompson Creek, seen in the photograph? Yeah,
we've been getting lots of questions about even applying them upstream of the bridge. So right now, currently, we're just focusing downstream. Is it Muzzy Road or Newman Lake Road? I'm not sure the official name, but we're the road, the main road that has the bridge, because I've seen it called different things. But anyway, that downstream of the bridge. So there is a change in, we are going to create a little bit more flooding as a result of doing this, but that's the point of them, right? Is to create that flooding in the depositional environment. And with that bridge and that road, it takes, essentially we have to make sure that we're not going to create more flooding over that road, right? And so currently this current design has taken that into account. We've looked at running the analyses to make sure that we're not going to have a negative impact or increased flooding. We're starting the structures downstream far enough that it's not going to have an impact on the fire station there or the roadway and the bridge. But when you start thinking about putting them in other spots, or particularly upstream of the bridge or in another ditch, we just have to pay attention to that, right? And so it takes some analysis to figure out if they can be operated without causing additional constraints or flooding on that infrastructure. And if they were to, then it's a whole different story. Then you'd have to revamp the roadway and the bridge and all of that to come in to account for it. And so anyway, it gets a little more complicated about figuring out where to put them. So, but right now we're focusing on this area where we know it'll have minimal impact, and then, believe it'll have minimal impact other than what we wanted to do, and then see how successful they are, and we could go from there.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Not seeing any more questions, so we can move on to the next part.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Sue.
One last comment. If there are any from the community in particular, if there are comments, there feedback, any questions you want to ask me or my students who I think might still be on here. I'm not sure if they've stuck around this long, but we very much value the input from the community, and it helps us to sort of look at what we're doing, and particularly for the students to learn more about community engagement, and that as they work on these types of projects. So if you have any comments, feedback, or questions, you can send them through Dawson to get to me. That'd be great. We'd love to field them.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of kind of external funding and grant sources and such, I just wanted to touch base a little bit. I know we're running behind a bit, but just real quickly, just kind of wanted to show the numbers behind what's going on out at Newman Lake outside of the assessments that you all pay as community members. The Department of Ecology grant that Dr. Sue was talking about to the Lands Council, it's actually quite a bit more than this $100,000, but that's kind of a ballpark estimate of what could be thrown at this project, you know, as far as people's time and all of that sort of stuff. There's also another Department of Ecology grant to the Spokane Conservation District for, I believe it's septic implementation. That's $500,000. The state capital budget award was about $400,000, and the gift, the money from the commissioners, the county, for the BOA was 160. So that's just in the last about 2 years. That's over $1 million from external funding sources of different conservation groups, the state, or the actual county. And just to, you know, that's pretty amazing that there's that many groups working towards the betterment of Newman Lake. So I'm going to hold off on questions since we are running a little bit behind. But again, you know, email any follow-up questions you may have. We're going to move on to the assessment map update chat.
Am I on? Am I here?
You're on, Chad.
Thanks, Dawson. That's great work that you guys are doing. I appreciate all that, and the stuff that Gonzaga is willing to do with their graduate program, and the undergraduate program is fantastic. It could have some huge benefits. Real quick, I know we're up against it. We've got the Board of Assessment in place. The three, oh my goodness, I can't get to my website. The three assessors, I'm sorry, Board of Appraisers are in place. The three appraisers are Larry Rees, Brian Vincent, and Garrett Waldner. There's a link on the Newman Lake page, the county website, Newman Lake page, where we're going to give all the updates to the Board of Appraisers. Let's see, the first meeting was held today, and it was very, very, very preliminary, setting the stage for the Public Records, Open Public Meeting Act, all of the background legal stuff that goes along with a board in a public setting. Ron just posted a link to the Board of Appraisers site. They're setting meetings every 2 weeks on Wednesday at 10 o'clock for right now. And we're off and running. So we do estimate the first phase will be completed by the end of December. We will not make this appraisal or this assessment season, but should be well in time for the next assessment season. So that's all I have in general. Are there any questions? No questions. I did it so well. I'll hand it back to you, Marianne. That's all I have.
Well, thanks, Chad. A little bit of a quick wrap up. We are also, just to let folks know, and we'll get more information out later, but we are going to have 3 open advisory board positions, positions that are expiring at the end of the year. And some may be interested in, or interested in reapplying, but we're always interested in looking at new candidates as well. So if you're interested, kind of stay tuned. We'll probably post the application on our website, and expect that we'll probably have applications due by the end of October. It's kind of our tentative schedule. Just also to keep people in the loop, we're set up. Dam Safety Office is finally coming out to do their inspection now that some of the COVID restrictions are reduced a little bit. So they're going to be out next week, and we'll be going out with them as well on September 22nd. The budget hearing is scheduled for October 12th. We'll have our final budget out for comment around the end of the month, and expect after the budget is approved, we run our draft roll and hold our hearing on that in early December. Don't have a date on that yet. As I've said before, we are really looking for your feedback and your comments on our proposed budget proposals. We'll get this PowerPoint up on the website here tomorrow, and would like your comments by Monday morning. You can email that to Dawson or I, and I think Dawson just put the email addresses up on your screen right now. So if you could get comments in, the sooner the better. If you can do it before Monday morning, that's great. Give us a chance to talk to the advisory board and work through any comments that you have. So appreciate that. And some of the links, I think we're going to be pulling some of the links from the presentation onto our website, and we'll try to get that up tomorrow as well.
Yeah, quite a few of them should be up there, and then once we post this PowerPoint too, some of them will be in here, but we can pull them out, like Marianne said.
And if you're missing something or had any other questions, feel free to follow up with Dawson or I on that as well. So yes, and thank you very much, everybody, for coming tonight and asking good questions. Let's see, is there one more? Oh, one more question. How many properties are grandfathered and exempt from traditional increases or levels of taxation? Not quite sure I understand that. Tell you what, Rick, if you want to maybe elaborate a little more and either email that or maybe we can even get on the phone here and I can get a better understanding of what your question is, and we can follow up with you on that in the future. That would be great. Thanks. Thanks, Rick. All right, everybody. Yeah, good. Thanks for joining us, and any questions, just let us know, and we'll try to keep you guys in the loop with our emails and the information from the advisory board as well. So you all have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you. Have a good night.